All right, so this week we're going to continue where we left off last week, or not last week, week before last, the last meeting, um, where I decided that I was going to build a feed reader because the one that I have does not meet my requirements. I keep discovering new problems with it. I discovered another problem with it yesterday, um, and so I want to build my own from scratch. So if something goes wrong, I can do something about it. Uh, Last time we talked about our data model and set up our data model, and then started on describing an interface for our database. And since the last meeting, I went over this design again, and I found a few problems with it. The first being, and let's see if I can remember all this. So we need to keep track of the last time a particular feed was updated so that one, we can send that information with our request, and the um, well, actually no. So we can. It was the last time we attempted to update it, so we can know when to check it again, especially if we restart the program. We need to store. We also need to store the update rate. Um, and then we need to store the e tag and or the last modified value. Now, the e tag and last modified value are both basically same ways, the same way of representing whether or not the feed has been modified since the last time you checked it, to check and see whether or not anything has changed. And both of those values are values that you can submit to with your request to get the feed, and then there is an HTTP response that it'll give you back if nothing has changed. And so then you're not grabbing the whole thing every time. It's considering the amount of bandwidth that's available to us today, it's probably not a big deal, but it is a quick and dirty way that we can, if we get that response back, we can short circuit any of the rest of the work that we have to do in order to update our feed items. So let's see, our update rate is going to be how often we are configured to attempt to update the feed. One of the things that my old feed reader does, and I don't know if it does it really well, but it does do it, is it will, um, over time, it will figure out about how often the feed updates, and it will adjust how often it checks the feed based on that. I don't think we're going to do anything that complex, but we do at least need to have some sort of configurable value for how often a feed updates. So I have several feeds that only update once a week, so there's really no point in checking them maybe more than once or twice a day. And then I have other feeds that update multiple times a day, and so you probably want to check them hourly or more or less than that. Let's see. So we already talked about ETAG and last modified, and we discussed ID last time. So as far as our feed um, items, I did some more thinking about this. We do need to include whether or not the feed item has been considered viewed and whether or not it's been marked red. So the difference being is that um, if there are feeds that you have not even looked at yet, like they've come in, but you've never even seen them or know that they exist, then you have not viewed them. Whereas if you mark them red, then they don't need to be shown anymore. And so it's basically three different states that a feed item goes through. It's been downloaded, but it hasn't been seen yet. It's been seen, but it hasn't been marked red, and then it's been marked red. And so it kind of follows. There's a workflow that that feed items go through. And so you have to keep track of both of those states. And all feed readers do this in some way or another, where when your feed reader goes in the background and checks for stuff, it it will it will say, okay, we've got these new feeds, but you haven't actually looked at them yet. And so, if you've got like a desktop application, there'll be um, there'll be a icon that lights up in your in your in your application tray or whatever to let you know that there are new feeds that you need to at least look at. And if you stop and restart the application, you need to know whether or not to light up that icon, and you need to know, be able to let the user know, hey, you've still got feeds that you haven't even acknowledged that they exist. So that's what that takes care of. I think I also added enclosure URI. So enclosure URL is where we could download any sort of enclosure like a podcast MP3. The enclosure URI then is, where is it on your file system? So I downloaded it, we put it in this directory, we configured it to put it in this directory. We need to be able to know where to put it. And having an enclosure URI also tells us, like, this feed item has been marked as red, it's old, we don't need to keep it around anymore because it's also, when we go to refresh the feed, it's only showing us the 10 latest items. This feed item has already dropped off the end. Now we need to know whether or not we can safely wipe it from our database. Has it been viewed? Has it been read? And then the last thing is, does it have have we downloaded the enclosure? Because if we've downloaded the enclosure, we don't want to get rid of that feed item because it's tied to some file that you've downloaded that you're going to use to view this later. So those are the things that I've added in since the last time we talked, at least into the data models. For I can't remember if I did configuration settings, but it's pretty straightforward. Any database settings in the enclosure download directory. So I did some more reading. One of the things that I was looking at for a database interface was one that supported gEvent out of the box. And Piwi advertises support for gEvent out of the box. The problem is it does not support gEvent when there isn't a socket connection involved. And so the difference, for those of you that don't understand the distinction, when you have like a MySQL database and you have a client that's connecting remotely over the network, ultimately it has to create a network socket to do that connection. gEvent can make that work asynchronously automatically. But in the case of SQLite, where your database is in a file system, you never create a network socket because you are not connecting to a database over the network. You're just opening a file. Piwi does not support gEvent in the case of SQLite, and the core database support that we need is SQLite. And so I thought about this, and I came to two realizations. One is I've actually used SQLite in a GUI-driven application to do lookups on a large database with 250,000 entries in one table. Well, no, let's see. It's 250,000 entries in one table with a many-to-many relationship to another table that had 160,000 entries in it. And I had it indexed with the proper indexes. I could hit a button and it would do its lookup and display a pop-up fast enough that it didn't interfere at all with the user experience. So this database that we're doing is going to have a similar many-to-many relationship. It is going to have we're going to put the proper indexes in it. It's going to be much smaller. And so I have a feeling that probably trying to do these SQL queries, at least on a SQLite database, trying to do them asynchronously is premature optimization. It's probably something that we don't actually need to do to make this run efficiently enough. And so for now, I'm just going to pretend like SQLite is not a big enough blocker to cause us problems. Because in practice, I've seen larger databases work without issue. Now, and it even worked, and to put it in perspective, I was running this application on my mom's laptop, which had a mechanical hard drive in it, and it still worked fine. So it wasn't the delay to do the query and get back the information was fast enough that if there was a hitch, it wasn't even really noticeable. And so I think the worst thing that would happen is so in one situation when we read from the database, it's going to be in response to the user interaction, like pressing enter to or going up and down and looking at different feeds, or looking for unread feeds and stuff like that. Since it's in response to user input, it's probably not as big of a deal. The one place where it could hitch and potentially cause a user experience issue is when it's attempting to update feeds in the background and then writes to the database while you're attempting to interact with the program. So we'll have to see how bad it is, and more importantly, how bad it gets as the number of different feeds and different feed items fill up in the database. So for now, I'm not going to worry about it. But what this also means is that if it is an issue, we're going to have to roll our own either way. So now it doesn't matter which ORM that we use. We were kind of locked into Pewee before because of the supposed G-event support was going to save us some effort. Now it doesn't matter. And so this unlocks a couple of other options. So the big three contenders now for ORM support, or the ORM library that we're going to use, are Pewee, SQL Alchemy, and Pony ORM. And Pony ORM looks interesting because it does things like automatic caching. It has queries that automatically optimize, and so that makes it a really strong contender for oh, and its query syntax is more Pythonic. It looks more like a Python query that you would use just on a normal Python data structure than something that looks like you're wrapping your interface to a database. So after this, the next time I work on this in my spare time, I'm going to read up. I had read up on Pony and kind of dismissed it because it's like, well, it doesn't have G-event support. But now that we're not worried about that anymore, it becomes a much more viable option. And it's some of the stuff that it has in how you do queries and stuff. It looks very intriguing. And if their claims of optimization and especially caching are to be believed, it's probably a strong contender for the one that we're going to use. Especially if as you like navigate around the user interface, a lot of like things that you would do will change what is shown in a view, and you've got to query that from the database in order to get it to show. Well, if you're going back and forth between different views and the query is already cached, that will probably help our the responsiveness of the interface. Even if we did get it to work nicely with G-event, just our results will pop up faster regardless if there's caching going on in general. So let's see. So yeah, so this is now a thing. The interface does not need to return a future anymore. A few things that's changed since last time. I was thinking about how some of the additional things that we were going to need to do in order to interface with the database. So we already had add feed, so I've added a couple more options to this. The update rate is now in here. Now we can update individual feeds, like if the user decides to edit a feed and say, well, I want to move it to a different group, I want to change its name, I want to edit its URL. The homepage, a lot of this stuff is not going to be modifiable by the user, but it's things that the application is going to need to modify in the database, such as if we query a feed and its homepage changes, well, we need that to be reflected in the database. The last time we attempted to update it, we need to manage that. Our last acquired e tag or last modified tag and then our update rate, which actually that one can be modified by the user as well. So some of these are managed by the application under the hood, but they all effectively happen through the same interface because we are modifying a particular item in our feed table. Then we need the ability to delete feeds. Let's see, and some of these are the same. Yeah, get feed. We need to be able to specify whether or not we're looking at we need to be able to update feed items to basically to mark them as read or viewed. And then also the application should manage deleting old items. So we need a way to do that. So, all right. So from here, let's see, where do we need to go from here? So the thing that we should probably start doing is actually coding up our interface for our database. So let's I want to start a to-do file, but I don't think we need to get bogged down in that. So we need to so let's start actually by creating our database model. And so this will give us a chance to dig into the Pony documentation. And so if we're going to use Pony, we're going to come into here to our requirements. We're going to get rid of Pewee, and we're going to use Pony. So I'm going to work on the assumption that we're going to use Pony. And because we have a well-defined interface to our database, if we decide that Pony is not going to work out, we can always change the things, the interface behind these methods to use SQL Alchemy or Pewee. All right. The other option is Tortoise ORM, but that uses the async framework built into Python, and I'm not terribly excited about that, so we're not even gonna look into it. Okay. So we have our requirements, Pony, and let's see. I need a new terminal window. New window, default profile. Workspaces, Kyle Sweet Reader, there we are. Okay. So environment bin activate. So we're going to activate our environment. We're going to look at what I've got installed in here already. Okay, so I have SQL Alchemy. I do not have Pewee in here. So I'm going to uninstall SQL Alchemy. Install SQL ALCHEMY. Yes. All right. So that takes care of that. And we're going to do pip install -r requirements to update our requirements. Okay. So if we do a pip list, we now have Pony, and it looks like it also installed a few additional requirements for Pony. So, okay. So let's work through our database model here. And I'm going to pull the Pony documentation in here. Let's see. And I'll go ahead and we need everything. Oh, this is a pain. Okay, so I'm going to keep the documentation off screen. If you want to follow along, I will go ahead and post that in the chat. So, and we're gonna keep it pretty simple here for our first pass. And I think after we've and we'll see how far we get, but I think once we're done describing describing our database to Pony ORM, that we'll call it a day, because I've already been rambling on for about half an hour here. Okay, so oh, and the other thing is they suggest that we, to make sure that this has been Python import, let's do from pony.orm import. Okay, so that looks like that's working. Good. All right. So the first thing that we need to do is create a database. So from pony import ORM, which is going to be, looks like it's Pony's main interface. And I'm just going off the documentation here. There's obviously going to be gaps in my knowledge because I'm going to need to read up on this before the next meeting. So I'm just going to follow the example to do pretty much what we need. Their getting started guide doesn't go into details, as it shouldn't. But so if there's, so if people have questions, I'll happily dig into the documentation and see if we can figure it out. But for now, we're just going to follow the example to essentially build what we're looking for. So we need to create a database object. So we'll call it DB equals, and then ORM dot database. And we're not going to specify anything about the database. It looks like this uses something similar to Pewee, where you have to tie your ORM classes to a database object. And then we will actually tell it, oh yeah, this database that all these objects are hooked up to, that's actually a SQLite database, go. So it looks like this follows a similar pattern. So we're going to define a class, and for this one we're going to do feed, and this is our this is going to map one-to-one with our feed in our data model. So that needs to inherit from db dot let's see, entity, and then we're going to give it some class variables that will describe what basically we're describing what the table looks like, so that Pony can build our tables for us and update and handle queries and do all the things. So the first thing we want is let's see, we are not going to define an ID explicitly yet, but we are going to because I believe the IDs are going to be used set up automatically for us. Is usually the case when you start setting up your relationships. So let's see. So first we're going to do name equals ORM dot required, and this is going to be a string. I noticed that I didn't define any of these data types, so that's going to be something that we look at. So right now, I'm just going to assume that everything's a string, and then if there's a date time object, we'll deal with that later. But for now, I think we'll just assume that everything's a string. So let's see, name, URL, and I'm just going to copy and paste this guy. Let's see, URL, homepage. Let's see, URL homepage. Last update. Let's see, update rate. And this is something that's probably not going to be, so these two items, the rate will probably be the frequency of updating in seconds. So let's change this to an integer. Last update is probably going to be a date time object, but I'm not sure how to do that in Pony, so we'll sit on that for now. Let's see, etag, that is definitely a string. Last modified, let's see. Now last modified, we're not sure how we're going to represent that yet, because last modified, when you send back the date, you're sending it back as a string, and it has to match exactly in order for the feature to work properly. So we might just store that one as a string as well, if it exists, and not try and convert it to a date time object or anything like that. Let's see, and then we need our group. So notice that we haven't defined our groups yet. So I'm going to define a group. But this we want to, we have our group table over here, but we haven't defined it in here yet. So what we need to do is come up here and go class, group, let's see, db.entity. And then this one's pretty simple. We're going to have just a group name. Okay. Now, what we can do is we can
the 1.3 for campus.
Yeah. She sent me a note.
Hey, Srinivas, you want to mute yourself?
She said she saw that on their new.
Srinivas.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna mute myself.
Thank you. It's okay. Okay. So now that we have the group group class created, now we can come down here and put in group for our ORM. So the other thing is that the group is not. So this is not actually required. So yeah, optional. I'm going to assume that that's what I need to do. So you don't necessarily have to belong to a group. Let's see, is there anything else that's optional? Let's see, last update, we can make that optional as well, because you start without a last update. Homepage is required, URL is required, name is required, update rate is required, etag is going to be optional, and last modified is going to be optional. Okay, so that allows the, I believe that those will return none if we attempt to query them and there's nothing in the database for them, and that's fine. Okay, so now we need to define a feed item. Let's see, so that's a db.entity. And this one's going to be, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to specify the feed. And this one is required. So we're going to do, oops, let's see. Let's just grab you. Okay, it's going to be required, but it's going to be a required feed. So that takes care of that. So we don't have to worry about our ID because that's handled automatically, but the ID of the feed we belong to. So this handles that automatically for us. We don't have to worry about the implementation details. So then we're going to do, let's see, our enclosure. Let's see, enclose your, and let's see, the URL. No. So this is going to be an optional string. Let's see, enclosure, URI, which is also going to be optional. So that's the path to the file on the system. So then we've got, let's see, red, which is going to be required. And that's going to be a Boolean. And then let's see, viewed. Let's see, okay. and then the text of the item, which is going to be a string, and then the URL for that specific item. So if we were to, so there's a, there we go. So if we said we want to open this item in our web browser, that's the URL that would we would need to go to. Okay. So this, in a nutshell, is our data model. And that's really all there is to it. So let's, since that didn't actually take very long, let's see. So one of the things that the documentation points out, so they use, they mention a set relationship with, so a person can have more than one car. And so let's look at the documentation for what this says. The car's attribute is declared set and has a car type. This means that this is a relationship. It can keep a collection of instances of the car entity. Car is specified here as a string because we didn't declare a car by that moment yet. The car entity has 3 mandatory attributes: make, model, and string. Let's see. Okay. If we need to create a many-to-many relationship between 2 entities, we should declare 2 set attributes at both ends. The Pony creates the intermediate database table automatically. Okay. So it sounds like what we need to do is, rather than we need, instead of declaring it like this, where we have, I guess we can set it up like this, because they have, in the documentation, they have it set up both ways. So the owner is a link back to the class that owns it, but this relationship going the other way, we need to specify it in our feed table. So we need a feeds member. So we're going to go, let's see, feeds. And this is going to equal orm.set, and, or not feeds, I'm sorry. Let's call this items. Like this. And then we'll do it a set of feed item. Okay. We could also change this to just item, but we'll call it feed item just so it's more explicit. So now we've got a one-to-many relationship and a one-to-one relationship here. Okay. So now we have this. We should also do the same thing with our group. So for group, we have our it's an optional group. And so then we should do feeds. This is where I was getting ahead of myself. Equals orm.set, and then feed, like that. So now we have all the relationships set up between our different classes. So let's see if we can address let's see if we can address our data types here. Now, if we wanted to do something like import these and then look at them, we can see some of the extra stuff that it's doing in the background. So they mention it here in the documentation, so I'm just going to demonstrate it here. So let's see, let's do LL. Okay, source. Okay, so let's go source and then start up Python. and then let's import db underscore model dot. Okay, and then if we do, let's see, from for our convenience, we'll do from pony rm import star, and then we'll do show. Let's see, db model dot, and let's do group first. So let's see what this has to say about our different entities. So you'll notice here that we have, so it has all of the things that we added into our group, but it also has an ID field created automatically. So this is how the ID field is how it links groups to feeds and feeds to feed items. And we'll notice that all of these have the same thing going on. Also, I've noticed that I've set these to optional. Now, I didn't look at all at the optional documentation, so it's defaulting to an empty string. That might not be what we want. So we'll need to look at the documentation for optional and fix that appropriately. But let's look at support for data types. So let's see. They have code in here for describing how to bind your models to an actual database. We'll worry about that later, because for now we don't have any way of. We want our database file to be configurable, and we probably want to we'll either want to hard code something in temporarily and then replace it with something that's configurable later, or we'll come back. Actually, yeah, that's most likely what we'll do. So we won't worry about binding the database today. And again, if I do any of this stuff on my own, we'll cover it in the next meeting. So instead, let's get out of the getting started directory, and let's look for, let's see, array data type, JSON data type. Let's see, queries. Let's see, do they have a search? They have a search. Okay, let's search for date time. All right. Declaring entities. Here we go. Database required. Entity attributes. Emails. Oh, this is interesting. So we may need to stick the unique tag on a few of these. In fact, a few of these are probably going to be unique. So we'll get back to them later. Required and optional, primary key set. Okay. So, oh, that's the other thing is we might need to set some primary key as necessary. But it might not be necessary based on the way that our database is laid out. So I'll have to think through that. Set attribute represents a collection. We call it a relationship. So we've already done that. Composite keys. That's for primary keys. So let's see, composite indexes. Attribute data types. Pony supports the following attribute types. Date time. All right. Does it support? It supports date and time and date time. Perfect. Ooh, and time delta. Bonus. That's great. And that's great because then we can do our update frequency as a time delta. So what we'll do is we will come over here and we will say, from date time, import date time and time delta. All right, so last update is going to be optional, and that is going to be a date time. Update rate is going to be a time delta. Let's see, anything else that we need to do? Technically, last modified could be a date time, but because we want precision in the way it's represented going when we feed it back into the database, we're going to keep it as a string for now. I think technically feed parser wants us to store it as an array of integers. However, we'll need to look at feed parsers documentation later to figure out the best way to store this in the database. But we're just going to, as a feed is modified, we just need a way to be able to give it back to the feed the same way that we got it out. So let's see. Homepage. Let's see. So do we have anything for URLs? In float, decimal, date, time, bool, buffer, bytes, long string, long Unicode, UUID, JSON. Oh, used to mapping to native JSON database JSON type. That's cool. Int array, an array of integers, an array of string, an array of floats. Interesting. Okay. See that? Okay. So they don't have anything specific for URLs, which is fine. Let's see. So I think, let's see. So let's go over these real quick. Name, URL, homepage. Last update's the date time. Update rate is a time delta. E-tag and last modified are strings. Group is a group. Items are feed items. Let's see. Feed is the feed that we belong to. Let's see. String, read, viewed. Okay, yeah, that looks like everything. So this is going to be the model that we start out with for our database. So now that we've defined what our database is going to look like, now we need to actually build the interface around it, doing things like hooking it up to an actual database, creating tables if necessary, and writing our queries. So now we are going to start. Now we're going to start implementing. The next thing to do is to start implementing this stuff here. So add feed, update feed, delete feed, and all that stuff. And because we're not going to try and do it asynchronously, that simplifies our implementation considerably. So, okay, that's all I've got for this week. Are there any questions, comments, or smart remarks? Thank you for sticking around.
Thanks, Kyle.
Oh, you're welcome, Chandrika. Do you have any questions for me related to this or other things?
Not really. I was only thinking that if group should be optional for the feeds, but I guess you cannot, because if you want to display it in groups, and if there are some that don't have groups, so for displaying, but I guess you can have
Oh,
even
yeah,
at the display level too.
that's
I mean, you could
true.
say you could
So,
say if group is optional, and if none, just put it in a default group at the
oh, that's true.
when you're presenting it.
Yeah, okay. So we could have like a default group. Yeah. So the way so I'm basing this. I'm kind of trying to follow the work the interface that my existing feed reader has in terms of dealing with groups. And right now, the way I've got all my feeds organized is everything is in a group, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in a group. And so the way that my old feed reader presents that is you have groups, you have like, it's like a tree, but it only ever goes one layer deep because you can't have groups within groups. And I don't even want to think about implementing that. But well, and the other thing is like the OPML files that you can like do your imports and exports. It doesn't support, I don't think supports nested groups either. So we're not even going to mess with it. But what they do is you can, it's a one layer tree, but anything that's not a child is just listed alongside the groups. And so you can like select those individual feeds and it'll show you what's in them, or you can click on the group and it'll show you what's in the group.
Okay, but
yeah.
If there are too many, right, that are not grouped, then it's gonna scroll and it's not like, so it's good to put a default group just so that it's,
that's
you
true.
can display the top 3 in each group, and it will not, the UI will not become too cluttered.
Yeah. If you're following though enough feeds that it becomes a mess, you're following a lot of feeds, because I already follow tons of feeds, and it's like, it's, I don't know. It's, fortunately, a lot of the stuff I follow doesn't update very often. I mean, I have feeds for things that I just want to forget about until they update, and I don't want to have to think about it. Like,
that's true.
Like I'm on the news feed for the Bullet ML, or is it Bullet, not Bullet ML, the Bullet Physics Engine. They
I don't
post
know.
something to their feed like once every 6 months.
Oh, okay.
And I forget that it's in my feed reader until something comes up and it's like, oh, they released a new version. That's cool. Okay, I'd completely forgotten that I would cared about it. But the other thing that it has is they have as far as like items in their tree that you can click on. Um, there's two meta feeds, I guess you'd call them. And so and that actually reminds me of a feature that I haven't included it here because I never use it in my feed reader, but maybe I ought to start, is you can favorite certain feed items.
Oh yeah,
And
that'll be
so,
good.
yeah, so you have two meta groups. One is all the stuff that you starred. The other stuff is basically everything that's unread. So I would probably do like unread. So I might like have like a top level in the tree that's like everything. And so then instead of doing like having a meta feed that's like you click on this and it shows you all of the unread items, I just have it be like your view. It's like, okay, this is the show me everything, show me unreads, show and then you just like, okay, I'm going to go up to the very top and select all, which is going to be all of the groups and everything else, and everything that's not in a group. I'm not unless I'm viewing it along with everything else, I'm just going to assume that I only either care about that feed either individually or as part of the entire whole. So
Okay.
yeah. So I mean, if you've got so many feeds that are ungrouped that it causes problems, well, that's it's like having too many files on your desktop in Windows. It's like, well, that's just means you need to clean up your mess.
Yeah,
Let's be
I
honest.
never leave like files individually, very rarely, unless it's like temp file that I'm just gonna print and delete it.
Right. Yeah.
Generally, I don't, but it's personal preference, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah. No, I'm speaking from experience because I will like download stuff to my desktop and then forget to delete it and it'll build up over time. But then there are things that I don't want to forget that I have them on my computer, so I leave them on my desktop and it becomes a big mess. I actually there's a program that Stardock released for Windows called Fences, and it's specifically for dealing with that problem. It allows you to um it's basically like folders but that are always open and are part of your desktop. And so basically it's a way of grouping your desktop icons and then you can just grab them and slide them around and stuff. But it's yeah. Okay, now we're off topic. But yeah, okay. So I'm gonna say we're not gonna do a default group. We'll just have a if you're not part of a group, you're just, at least when we display it, it'll be outside of the group. So when you query for things, it's like you query for everything that includes stuff that doesn't have a group. You can query for a specific feed, or you can query for all the feeds in a group, and that'll cover the three major use cases.
yeah, and all run unread ones, then there's no grouping, right? If I say get all unread feeds, then will
Yeah.
it show me everything?
Yeah, I'll show you everything.
Okay.
Yeah, but the thing is when you're typically you're only going to you're going to filter by unreads, and as long if you're checking your feed reader pretty regularly, that's hardly ever going to be an overwhelming amount. The other thing is the other thing for groups is in my feed reader you can mark all feeds read, but you can do it by group, and so that's something that I'm probably going to carry forward.
That's useful. Yeah.
Yeah, and partly because one of my groups in my current feed reader is YouTube videos, and there are actually YouTube RSS feeds. You just have to know how to dig into the web page source code to find them.
Okay.
I'm probably going to add something in here to, like, if you give it a YouTube URL and say I want to subscribe to this, it will dig up the actual feed for you and add that.
Okay.
Yeah. Doing it from YouTubers homepage in YouTube is trivial because you just take their ID, which is part of the URL, and you tack it onto the end of a different URL, and that's your feed. If you do it from a video, you have to get the URL for the publisher's homepage, and then you can figure it out. So it's I mean, you can do it with string concatenation. It's pretty trivial. It's just a matter of digging it up in the page source for
Okay.
if you're not. It's a two-step process if you start from a video, but if you start from the user's homepage, it's trivial. So, yeah. But like all of my YouTube feeds, that's all in one group, and I also, I kind of compulsively check YouTube throughout the day, so it's usually I've already seen all of it by the time I look at my feed, switch computers and look at my feed. So I'm like, yeah, I've already seen all this stuff. So I just right click on the group and say, mark all as
Mark
read.
everything as read. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there are a couple, but I would actually like to get away from compulsively checking YouTube and just only going to YouTube to watch the specific videos that are in my feed reader. And so instead of actually subscribing to things in YouTube, just adding it to my feed reader, and then I just don't have to think about it.
Yeah. Only when there is new. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a lot easier. YouTube used to have an RSS feed that was your subscriptions, like all of your new, so as new videos came out that you were subscribed to, there was just a feed of just that, and they took that away because they are terrible people.
Okay. I would know.
Yeah.
I
Well,
hardly ever go to YouTube, so
yeah. Well,
like,
that's
probably the opposite of you.
well, yeah. On the flip side, I never watch television, although in reality, I do watch lots of television. It's just on my
Through
computer.
YouTube.
All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and call it a meeting.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kyle.